It's a pleasure to be here to have some hand in putting this wonderful panel together. We've got two great speakers that you're going to be hearing from this morning, and it's all about the blues. I had the occasion to be at the Hal and Mal's 30th anniversary of that establishment being in place a few weeks ago, and it's been a venue where some of the greatest blues artists have ever graced the stage. And it was just amazing to me, the conglomeration of people who came there, young, old, rich, poor, black, white, learned, less than high school education, etc. And it was because of the blues and the way that this music has of bringing people together, its impact on world music, its influence on gospel, rhythm and blues, rock music, jazz, so forth. It's been really, really amazing to me. And the fact that it started in Mississippi is also very amazing, but I say it couldn't have happened in a better place. So we're going to hear from two folks today who have put together a couple of books that talk about the music, show the story of the music in pictures, and those pictures tell a unique story in and of themselves. We're going to first hear from Mr. Ben Wynne, and Ben is a native of Florence, Mississippi. He's currently serving as professor of history at the University of North Carolina in Gainesville, Georgia. North Georgia in Gainesville, Georgia. That would be pretty tough to do.
It's a big commute.
Yeah, it's a big commute. He has authored a number of books, I think well over 11 books that Ben has authored, and he is, as I say, by training an historian. And a couple of the books that he has authored is Something in the Water, A History of Music in Macon, Georgia. He also has done The Man Who Punched Jefferson Davis, The Political Life of Henry Stewart Foote. I've got to read that just for the title. Also, In Tune, Charlie Patton, Jimmy Rogers, and the Roots of American Music. There are several others, but as I was reading Big Mama, A Hound Dog Tale, Big Mama and Elvis, a very, very good read, chock full of historical data about the blues, about the music industry, especially in the Deep South, in Los Angeles, in Texas, and the characters that he writes about. Just an amazing story of how I did not realize how much of a role California played in the development and popularization of blues and rock and roll music. Texas, of course, Memphis, Mississippi, and those we kind of know about that, but the role of Texas and California in it was just an amazing story to me. So we're going to hear Mr. Wynne come in his own way to talk about A Hound Dog Tale.
Thanks, Senator. Appreciate it. My name's Ben Wynne. I grew up around here, like you said, just south of here in Florence, and I'm now I hadn't lived here for about 25 years, but I always enjoy coming, and not only back to Mississippi, but I get to come to the Capitol building of the state of Mississippi. So there's a treat for me to be with you here today. The genesis of my book, A Hound Dog Tale, people ask me, well, one song, a hound, you ain't nothing but a hound dog, that song, how could you get 200 pages out of that? I say, well, I don't know, but it just happened. But where it came from initially, I was doing another project where I was studying old song lyrics and comparing country lyrics with old blues lyrics and stuff from the 1920s and 30s. But in the course of doing that, I knew the basic story of the Hound Dog, but basically I knew kind of what everybody knows. Elvis Presley did the most famous version, but he didn't do the first version. Willie Mae Thornton did the first version, and I assumed that Elvis heard Willie Mae Thornton's version and covered it. Okay, well that's really not what happened. I found out, first of all, if you look at the words of Willie Mae Thornton's version and Presley's version, if you take out that line, you ain't nothing but a hound dog that starts every verse. It's almost two different songs. The words are different, a different tempo. Anyway, so I started looking into the history of the song, and I started uncovering more and more and more things about it. And then I'll just give you the outline of it. The Hound Dog, it was written by two white Jewish teenagers. One from Baltimore and one from New York. So right there, you're going, what's going on there? Teenagers? Okay, and they had made their way to the West Coast and befriended a guy named Johnny Otis, who you may have heard of. They called him the father of rhythm and blues out there on the West Coast. And he sets them up to write a song for Willie Mae Thornton, Big Mama Thornton. And she got her own backstory, of course. She was born in Alabama, traveled around with traveling shows, and it's a familiar story. She ends up out where she was in Houston and has a disagreement over money with the people that are running the traveling shows, so they move on without her. She's stuck there. She starts singing in a nightclub that is owned by this guy named Don Roby, and they called him Diamond Don Roby. He was a kind of a gangster type. Gangsters in the music business, I know, hard to believe, but he was in Houston. He was sort of supposedly had ties with organized crime. His claims to fame, one time he almost beat Little Richard to death. He also, when he was negotiating deals, sometimes he'd be sitting at his desk and the artist would be here, and before they start talking, he'd reach in and he'd get a 38 and he'd put it up on the, so, swell guy. Anyway, Willie Mae Thornton, Big Mama Thornton, is singing at a nightclub he owns, and he also owned a record label, small independent record label, and he wanted to record her, didn't have a song, knew Johnny Otis, and Johnny Otis brings her out to California, and Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, the two teenagers who would go on to this tremendous career, and songwriting career, but they're only 19 years old at this point. Johnny Otis, they had written Kansas City, that song, I'm Going to Kansas City? Okay, that was their first. They written it or adapted it somehow. There is some question on that, but anyway, they were kind of well known to Otis, and he says, hey, write this song. We got this blues belter, female from Alabama, steeped in the blues and been with these traveling shows and so on and so forth. So they go and try to write a song for her to sing. And then they write this song in a very short period of time, like an afternoon, and they bring it back, and there's kind of this comical scene where they give it to her, and she starts singing it, but she starts singing it kind of like a ballad, more like a crooner, slow, not like they envisioned it, like the actual version. And at one point, Jerry Lieber, the white 19-year-old, tells Big Mama Thornton, a veteran blues performer, hey, you're not doing it right, okay? And there was some colorful language that was exchanged, and he's lucky he survived it. But anyway, she ends up recording the version that is, she sings it the version if you know that song. And anyway, it's an R&B hit. It goes to #1 on the R&B chart, big hit. And I don't know, she made a few $100s out of it, I think. Don Roby, the manager, took all the money, and the record, a lot of people took a piece of that. But then a bunch of cover versions came out. And right at first, immediately, it wasn't too many R&B cover versions. Wasn't too many blues singers that wanted to follow her. She had done such a good job, they didn't think they'd compete with that. So you got about 6 or 8 country music acts that make covers of this song, all of which are forgettable. But if you want to Google them, they're on there, and they got the twangy guitar and the pedal steel and the guy, the same words. And then Sam Phillips gets involved. Y'all know Sam, right? From he's part of the Elvis story. Okay, well, he hadn't met Elvis yet, but he did know a guy named Rufus Thomas up there in Memphis, who you might have heard of. And back then, they would do songs called answer songs. If a big hit came out, somebody else would produce a song that was almost like the big hit, and they'd try to trade off of the original song. So Sam Phillips writes this song called "You Ain't Nothing But a Bear Cat." And it's the exact same tempo and everything. And he gets Rufus Thomas, who was a Memphis, next to Elvis, Rufus Thomas was probably the most popular guy ever to be beloved there in Memphis. I mean, everybody loved him. And he records it, and Sam Phillips took a writing credit for it. Okay, so the thing ends up going up the charts. There's a picture in the book of the Billboard charts one week, and whenever it was, 53, 54, the Big Mama Thornton version was of Hound Dog was 1, and Bear Cat was 3. Well, so once it hits the charts, of course, it becomes a valuable commodity. And a major lawsuit ensues, and Diamond Don Roby sues Sam Phillips. Diamond Don Roby had all the publishing on that, and Sam loses. And as the story goes, you can make an argument this put Sam in such financial straits that he never really recovered. And some people say that was one of many things that influenced him later on selling Presley's contract like he did for $35,000. So you can make a case for that had some kind of effect, but the lawsuit was supposedly some kind of major lawsuit precedent that was set. At least at the time, it was an important lawsuit. All right, so anyway, Sam gets sued, and read an interview with Sam Phillips when that was happening, and in the Memphis newspaper, and he said, of course, we didn't copy this song. This is a new song. I wrote those words, blah, blah, blah. Then I read an interview with the Memphis paper he did in about 1985, and they were asking him about it. He said, of course we stole that song. What are you talking about? Have you heard it, So anyway, then the song ends up out in Las Vegas with a guy named Freddie Bell, who's kind of the invisible man in the Hound Dog story, right? Raise your hand if you heard of Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys. Nobody? Okay. Anyway, he was from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he was on local TV there in a program that sort of predated American Bandstand, if you remember that show. It was sort of that kind of thing. He ends up, he's out in Las Vegas, and he's got this band. It's about 8 or 10 guys in it, big band. And they got horn sections and I mean, there's a bunch of musicians, and they're basically a novelty act. A lot of dancing around and clowning around on stage. And they get this song, they see this song, Hound Dog, and Freddie Bell decides, hey, this would be good for our act, but we got to change the words. If you ever heard the Big Mama Thornton version, it's a gritty tale of a woman admonishing a no-account boyfriend or husband. I mean, it tells a little story there. And he said, we gotta rearrange the words. We need to keep that "you ain't nothing but a hound dog" because that's the hook, but we got to change the words. So the words, "you ain't never caught a rabbit, you ain't no friend of mine." But that's Freddie Bell wrote those. This Las Vegas lounge singer. That's the second most famous line in the song. Excuse me. So anyway, so they do this song, and it's kind of nonsensical, where they're singing to a dog, So it's not anything like and they jump around and howl at the moon, and they got this funny stage act they do. They were known more as comedians than musicians. But Elvis Presley's out there doing his first trip to Las Vegas, which he kind of bombed out. He'll later conquer Las Vegas. But he goes into one of the lounges one night and sees Freddie Bell. And he says, I won't do the Elvis voice, but he says, hey, I like that song. That'd be funny to do in our stage show. He didn't say that's a great blues song. He said, that's a good, funny song. We can do that. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Ha, ha, ha. Okay. So he puts that in his stage show. And then first time he sings it, boom, it's just this people go absolutely crazy. And so they sing it again the next time, and the next day it becomes this fixture. And he didn't really like the song. If you'd asked him, hey, what song do you want to be remembered by? He wouldn't have said that one. So anyway, so it's so popular that he records it. And then the Presley, people know a lot more about Elvis Presley than I do, but part of the Presley story is that he was getting popular, and they say he broke real big when he did the Ed Sullivan Show. That's famous appearance. He did 3 appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show. But really, according to my book, really, depending who you want to believe, there were 2 prior appearances where he did Hound Dog that set the stage for him to take off as a global phenomenon. I mean, he was already really popular, but he went on a program called the Milton Berle Show, and Milton Berle was the host of that, the comedian, and he did this famous kind of off-the-cuff sort of bluesy ending to, it's hard to describe, but anyway, he shook and he did a bunch of his gyrations that he was famous for, and that really scared a lot of people. So the next day, in the newspapers, that's all that there was over the newspaper. Every music columnist in the country, all of whom were at least 40 years old or older, just denigrated him and the performance, which, of course, what did that do to the kids? We love him even more. So you got that, and then 2 weeks later, he was scheduled to play on the Steve Allen Show. And Steve Allen fancied himself kind of an intellectual. He was a little bit of a stick in the mud, he wasn't like Milton Berle. And some people claim that they were trying to humiliate Elvis Presley, but Presley goes on that show and they make him sing. First of all, they make him dress up in a tuxedo and with tails on, and then they wheel out a dog, and he's got to sing the song to the dog. Okay. Yeah, Beagle. And you can see that too on the internet. And anyway, then the next day the papers are filled with that. Now what does that do? All those same kids and others, now they're mad as heck. Because what does Steve Allen try to do? They tried to tame our hero. So between the Berle appearance that got massive publicity and the Steve Allen appearance, it got massive publicity. It created a situation where Ed Sullivan had to put him on. Steve Allen beat Ed Sullivan in the ratings. So Ed Sullivan didn't like rock and roll music, but he knew about ratings. So that's when he goes on the Sullivan Show. It was 3 appearances, I believe $50,000. And Frank Sinatra at the time was only getting $4,000 per appearance. So it's a massive fee at the time. And anyway, he does what he does on those appearances. He sings Hound Dog and other songs. And but people kind of think that the Ed Sullivan Show launched him. Well, in one way it did launch him, but it also ended an era for him because it mainstreamed him, to a great extent. He was, before he was dangerous. After one of those Ed Sullivan appearances, Ed Sullivan came out and shook his hand and told him what a fine fellow he was, and stuff like that. So, he became more polished. So that era, that original era that launched him, pretty much ended with that. But all that, even before you get to the Elvis stuff, I mean, you got the Lieber and Stoller, the songwriters. You got Johnny Otis, the father of R&B on the West Coast. You got Diamond Don Roby, the gangster who almost killed Little Richard. You got Big Mama Thornton, her whole story. And then you got Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys, who without them, Elvis Presley would not have recorded that song. And again, it also, there's all kinds of issues involved. As you talk about Elvis Presley, there's always issues related to cultural appropriation. People talk about that. And then there was a generational thing happening in this 1950s generation of teenagers. They were the most independent generation of teenagers in history. And and what's going on at that point, rock and roll is coming in. And then you got the racial element, you got the white kids and you got the white girls listening to music sung by African-American artists for the first time. And then Presley, his timing, he just kind of blows up as a result of a lot of those factors. So I got 200 pages out of that. So thank you.
Ben, thank you for that. As I was reading the book, and we won't get into questions and answers just yet, but I said, man, I didn't know this. I thought it was a Big Mama Thornton to Elvis kind of handing the baton, but it's a lot more complex than that.
Right.
But thank you for that. Margo Cooper is a photographer and a photojournalist, I would call her. She began in 1993 photographing clubs around New England and in Chicago, and before long in Mississippi, Helena, Arkansas, and so forth. And on her very first trip to Mississippi in 1997 and 98, Cooper had the good fortune to photograph Sam Carr, Frank Frost, Bobby Rush, and Otha Turner, amongst many others. She was also able to photograph a lot of performers and iconic late career images of many legendary figures, including Bo Diddley, Honey Boy Edwards, B.B. King, Pine Top Perkins, Hubert Sumlin, and many youthful shots of Cedric Burnside, Shemekia Copeland, and Sade Thomas, themselves who are now in their 30s and 40s, but she photographed them as young people. During this time, the Burnside and Turner families and other Mississippi artists such as T. Model Ford, James Super Chicken Johnson, and L.C. Ulmer entered the national and international spotlight, ensuring the powerful connection between authentic Delta, Hill Country, and Piney Woods blues musicians and their audience continues. Bill Ferris, who wrote the foreword to Deep Inside the Blues. This is a collection of 34 stories and narratives, but also about 160 photographs of blues artists and their families. And Ferris wrote that beautifully woven together by Margo Cooper, Deep Inside the Blues is a treasure of memories and stories that clearly demonstrate how blues provided both an escape from poverty and racial violence and a platform for creative artistic expression. And this book is a great artistic expression of a great photographer and a great photojournalist, and she's going to tell her story about how this came about. Margo Cooper.
Thank you. As a former public defender and a lawyer who practices primarily representing parents as in abuse and neglect cases, I'm used to standing, so I'm going to stand. Thank you all for coming. It's, as I've said to a few of you and others along the way, I feel like I'm the lucky one. I'm blessed by having decided to come to Mississippi. My story started when I was in high school, and a friend of mine who had older brothers and their records played Buddy Guy and Junior Wells, Messing with the Kid. I didn't have any exposure to the blues, but when I heard that, it was like a bolt of lightning. Wow, you know, Junior's harmonica playing, his vocals, Buddy's guitar playing, it planted the seed for what became this journey, and it took decades to get on the way. I went to law school, I worked, became a public defender, and then I took a year off, and I started taking photography classes, and I started my own law practice in '93. At the same time, I started going into the blues clubs around the Boston area. And as had been happening through the 70s and the 80s, many of Chicago's best were playing across America, obviously around the world. And in the 90s when I started, some of Muddy Waters' musicians, among others, were coming east. So I met Luther Guitar Jr. Johnson was one of the first musicians that I met, and he grew up in Mississippi, and he became my friend. And then Willie Big Eye Smith was Muddy's drummer for 20 years. He grew up in Helena. Calvin Fuzz Jones played with Howlin' Wolf and Muddy, and you know, Jimmy Rogers, you name them. You heard Bo Diddley, Bobby Blue Bland. You know, people were coming and playing in the Northeast. And as I got to meet the musicians and hear the music and talk to them, what I was thinking, in addition to loving the music, was I need to go to Mississippi. These guys were alive when there was sharecropping, Jim Crow. I need to go to Mississippi. It was not more thought out than that, but it's just if I love the music, I needed to find out the stories. And I came in '97. My first trip was like I hit the trifecta. I went to a festival in West Point, and R.L. Burnside was there. Some youngsters who were playing at the Delta, learning through the Delta Blues Museum School. You can now hear today Lee Williams, big Anthony Sherrod, Paul Wine Jones, Honey Boy Edwards. It was great. And the next day, Dr. Joe, who was one of the founders of the museum, brought me to meet Annie Eggerson. Her husband was a cousin to Howlin' Wolf. And it was the beginning of just how welcoming, how kind people were. I said to Annie, her photograph is in the book. Can I take your picture? Yes. I had asked the editor of Living Blues at the time. I'm a contributing photographer and writer for Living Blues. Where should I go? And it turned out that the Other Turner Fife and Drum Goat Festival was happening that Saturday. What luck. And I drove there, you know, the old way in the days where somebody drew you a map. And if you've driven around the rural parts of Mississippi, it can be tricky if you don't know where you're going. But anyway, I got there. His daughter, Bernice, I met her first, just again, welcoming. I became friendly with Bernice. You know, what do you do in Mississippi? You know, it's like you go visit people over the years, and she didn't live that long. She had breast cancer. But I would bring pizza, and, you know, I would sit down with Bernice and her kids. Other Turner's grandchildren were playing music. Sade was 7 at the time. Grandsons, Andre Evans and Sade's brother Bill were playing drums. Rodney was playing drums. And it was an exposure to how community in Mississippi is. At that time, there weren't that many tourists. Other was, I kept going back every year. Other would slaughter the goat. Men from the community would help butcher the goat. They would cook the goat in the big black kettles, and goat sandwiches were a feature of the picnic. And Over the years, you just learn to pitch in, photograph, go behind if they need help. Othar was welcoming again, and hearing this music, it's 2 nights of music under the moon and the stars, and some of the hill country musicians, the Burnsides were often there. Luther Dickinson would be there. I mean, everybody honored Othar. Bobby Rush came one year. Sam Carr would be there, and I continued my relationship with the family over the years. And in November, the cover story of Living Blues will be my story on Sharday Thomas, who carries on her grandfather's tradition. She plays both fife and drums. I wrote Cedric Burnside's story, and what's beautiful about coming over 27 years to Mississippi is seeing how the young people, just started playing. It was natural to them, and how if you hear Cedric and Sharday today, they always talk about their grandfathers and the influence they had on them, and they are masters of the music in their own rights, but also humble and loving people. And the next day I went and I heard Bobby Rush playing in a little place in Mississippi. And I just continued to come. And very quickly, in 1998, I had taken a picture of Frank Frost, and I wanted to give it to him in '99, but he was sick. And I had asked Sam if we could go visit him, but he died shortly after that. That never happened, but I said to myself, has anybody, let Frank Frost tell his story in his words? I'm busy, but I'm going to make time to meet with as many of the older musicians as I can and tell their stories in their words. So I continued to photograph, and I would come back and forth to Mississippi, tape record, transcribe, write, go in my darkroom, come back, and we would work together with each of the musicians. I would work together over several years before their story was ready. And as I say in my book, these musicians were my teachers. They gave to me, and it's how I learned. And I believe, as I say in the book, that remembering is a duty. Remembering is a sacred duty. And so the stories are published in Living Blues. Could I expand on the stories? Could I bring their stories to more people, which I felt is my responsibility? And also, I wanted to share the stories. They're beautifully told. The words of the musicians are poetry, and people need to know about their experiences. So, Elsie Ulmer, as many of the musicians told me, music and singing in the fields brought solace and comfort. And many told me how at least you could go up and down the fields while you're singing, and time would pass. And Elsie Ulmer said to me, singing in the fields was where everything come from. All the blues come out of the field, and I be just picking cotton, humming, listening. I hear somebody way over yonder sing. I woke up this morning, my head was bad. My baby done left me, and I was all so sad. He gonna pick about 900 pounds that day. Hey baby, he getting louder and everybody listening. Come home with me. Hat raggedy, coat raggedy, shirt raggedy, red handkerchief in his pocket. Overalls grown, shoes tied up with wire, patches on his knee. Lord have mercy, now I'm fixin' to tell you about the blues. The words of these musicians are poetry in and of themselves. I'm sorry they weren't published and known, but I'm here to bring those stories to you and as many people as I can. Of course, as I mentioned, these musicians grew up in a time of Jim Crow, segregation. Elsie put it to me this way. There was no mixing in them days, but I can tell you this, and Elsie's experience was unlike any others of the musicians that I met, but it's good to know there were different experiences. The white boys and girls that I knew and was raised up around, we got along like brothers and sisters. Lord have mercy, we did. Their daddies would kill them if they didn't. We couldn't meddle, call each other names. I can prove that today, because a lot of folks are still living. And I said to LC brought me to some of his white friends, and it was interesting. Their fathers and grandfathers played with LC's father. It went for generations, and they were still playing music. And LC, of course, lived in other places outside of Stringer, Mississippi, so he experienced the worst of it. And he said to me, it just makes you cry to see how we got along and to see how much prejudice there was everywhere else. When God made everybody, nobody can help how they made. God made a bouquet, like you got a bouquet of flowers, different colors. You ever see them flowers growling at one another? No, you don't. You ever see trees fighting? I'm sorry that LC isn't here today to tell you in his own words. And I got to, and when I wrote his story, because it was hours away from Clarksdale in the hill country where I spent most of my time, I would stay in his guest room and go to sleep every night listening to him play music. And along with some of his other relatives, LC could play banjo, guitar, piano, you name it, and mandolin, and you should, I would encourage you all to look up his story and his records. You know, the musicians would tell me, as many of you may have heard, they only got to go to school 3 or 4 months a year when it wasn't harvesting or time to plant. You know, Willie Smith said to me, you know, we got the books the white kids didn't use anymore. And Willie's children went on, all of them graduated college. And what we deprived of people who grew up in those times, thankfully some of them were able to make it out of Mississippi and find the music careers that brought them joy, but many of these stories you can find in detail and deep inside the blues. Luther Guitar Jr. Johnson became one of my friends, and I did his medical care and brought him to his doctor's appointments over 25 years. Muddy was my idol. I told my mom, someday I'm gonna play with Muddy Waters. You're gonna pay to see me. I'm gonna make it big. During my years with Muddy, we traveled the world. And how Luther conducted himself and his performance, as many of the musicians would say, whether you play for 5 people, 500, or 5,000. When you see Guitar Junior, you are going to see a show. I work hard to keep that name. When I get to the stage, it's magic. Magic that I have in me. The love is what I give people. I'm like a preacher preaching to a congregation. I could be a preacher if I wanted. I bring my audience to me. Just the touch of my music is so strong. Sometimes I talk to people and they tremor. It's more than just playing. It's spiritual, it's a feeling, and it's pure. From the time I was a kid, I've wanted to reach other people through my music. Music is powerful. It can heal you and it can kill you. It's got to be played with a feeling. I feel every damn thing I'm playing. My music is a gift from above, and I want to use it as a gift. Share it with my fans. If I couldn't play and sing, I could be back in Mississippi. I could be locked up in jail. You never know. For all the years I dreamed about playing the blues, my dreams came true. Music was a way out of the fields for some of the musicians. And luck, determination, grit, finding their ways to Chicago as Luther and Calvin and Willie did. But none of them forgot their roots. Calvin Fuzz Jones returned to Mississippi when I first met him. My first trip in '97, I visited, and who's there? He's there with his mother. And many of them came back because of their mamas, their families, and visiting was always important to them. Mickey Rogers, who's alive today and is in Greenville, Mississippi, told me the story. My grandmother, mother, aunties, and uncles, and a whole bunch of cousins moved to the bourbon plantation out from Leland. My mother went to work picking and chopping cotton with my younger brothers and sisters. I used to come down to Mississippi every year after school got out. They put me on the train by myself. Emmett Till was in a class with my older brother in Chicago. Emmett was 3 years older than me. He had gone to Mississippi to visit his family in the summer of 1955. They went together on the train. That was the year Emmett got killed. My mother and grandmother said Emmett whistled at a white lady. I asked, why did they kill him? They said, that's what they killed him for. Just for whistling? You can kill somebody for that? They didn't let me stay after Emmett got killed. They sent me right back to Chicago. I told my auntie I ain't never in my life going back there no more. But as I think every musician that I met, family was life. Family was nurturance. You never forget family. So after a few years, Mickey came back, and as I said, he lives in Greenville today. Mickey said, I miss my peoples. Over the years, I'd say to Mama, why don't you just leave and come back to Chicago? I didn't think my mom should be picking and chopping cotton. I knew what it was like working on the plantation. Mama was set in her ways. She didn't like the city. Willie Big Eye Smith was there in Chicago and walked by Emmett Till's open coffin. Of course, he never forgot. Betty Vaughn, I was working on, and sometimes I would be working on somebody's story and I'd meet their neighbor or friend. I was working on Josh Stewart's story, and Betty Vaughn came over to see, what's going on? Who's this? And she said, I was born on December 27th, 1927, right here in Jonestown. I know everything that happened here. Yes, I heard about people being lynched in Jonestown. My mother did talk about it. They said there was a white man wanted to buy some colored people's property. They owned a piece of land in an all-white area of town. The owner told the white man it wasn't for sale. They found a black man swinging in the tree the next morning. I know the spot where my mother and them said it was. Okay, I've got 1 minute. So, there are many stories and people to honor, and I will close with Joe Ayers said to me, singing brings memories, and Joe is still alive in the hill country, and you can see him at some of the festivals. When you hear and play those old lonesome songs, you're saying you've been there too. Black folks, they can feel that music, and the more they feel it, the more they can play it. People's cry when you start playing. A musician gets lonesome or something like that. They might cry all day and play that guitar to death. If a musician is by himself or around a whole lot of folks, he may get up and walk over there, cut the amplifier off, go somewhere and start crying. That's what you call soul. You can call it blues. It's the same thing. From my experience, all the blues comes from hard labor, black labor, a hard day's work, pulling corn, chopping and picking cotton, being behind the mule and swinging the axes. That and your woman done quit you and gone with some other man, gone away and left you. You staying at the house all alone. All that falls right back, makes men sing the blues. Playing to get $1 a woman, to get out behind the mule, was a big thing back in the day. Thank you all for coming. I wish we had time to talk.
Thank you, Margo. Thank you, Margo. And if you read the testimonials of many of the folks that she interviewed, you see that the blues was a way out for many of them, but it was also a way in, and as a way into the soul. And as she has so eloquently put it, all of these folks have stories. They have hopes, wishes, dreams, and aspirations. The blues was in many ways the form, the expression where they were able to get that out, to get those hopes, wishes, and dreams out to the rest of the world. And in both these books, you see that folks were using the blues as a vehicle, as a way out, but it was also a way back in. We have time for one question. If anybody has a burning question that they'd like to ask either of our presenters today. Yes.
Margo, I had your book, so I would bring it back later so you can sign it, but I was just wondering your photographs. Do you exhibit your photographs around so that other people can enjoy the piece?
That's the next step I'm working on. So stay tuned. I'm meeting with Yvette Ray, the curator at the two museums. They don't have an opening till 2027. I'm doing History is Lunch October 16th in Jackson and meeting with some of the folks. We'll see.
All right, thank you so much for attending this panel.